All right, so here we are. We're back in the studio. I thought it'd be fun. I'm probably going to do this as a two-part video here where I'm going to actually show you a little bit about editing. I didn't want the first video to run too long, but I thought it'd be important to go over some of the editing techniques in Lightroom to get a final image. So as you already know, I was just out shooting the lady slipper here at Theodore Wirth Park in the suburbs, kind of Minneapolis area here. It was a very short shoot. The lady slipper only blooms for about 2 weeks, and I was lucky enough to catch it in that time frame. So as you can see, this is one of the images that I pulled up, the one I want to try editing today, and we'll run through a lot of the different simple editing techniques. There's going to be a lot more you can do in Lightroom, but these are just going to be the quick sliders here to kind of help transform your image to its final form. So as you can see here, I was shooting at a 200mm range on my 70-200 f2.8 LIS lens from Canon here. So that 2.8 is what helped me get my focus nice, and that nice bokeh, nice and soft. So we got a little bits in focus here. Anything on that same focal plane is going to be in focus, and then everything else quickly starts blurring out. This particular image I shot at 1/640th of a second at f2.8 and ISO 100, so that 2.8 gave me a nice large wide aperture, so I could keep that ISO low and maximize as much detail in the picture as possible. So let's get started here. So right away, just looking at this picture, I can already tell that I don't like the white balance. And even looking at the histogram here, I can see that there's just too much in yellow hue to it. So the idea, of course, is you want it to look as natural as possible. I'm pretty sure when I shot it, I was in and out of the shadows in the woods and things like that. So I think I probably had it on cloudy or shade, auto white balance setting. But you can just go right over here and change it to whichever white balance you feel is best. I usually start with auto, and you can see that already kind of changed the background a little bit more green, cut out some of the yellows in there. To get a little bit more detailed with it, it's as simple as just kind of going with this little eyedropper here, and then highlighting the whitest part of your picture, and then that will change the overall white balance in accordance to what you select there. So you didn't really see too much change that time. I was on a pretty white area. The auto did pretty well. So that already changed that. It's already looking a little better right there. I can tell it's underexposed also by looking at the histogram. You can tell it's a little far on the left side, which means it's a little bit underexposed. So the next thing I want to do is jump up the exposure a little bit. So as you can see, there you go. You want it nice and bright and detailed. So usually if your histogram is sitting somewhere in the middle here, you're doing pretty good. I don't think the color cast is where I want it exactly, so I'm going to adjust the temp and the tint a little bit to kind of get it, again, to get a little bit more natural look. If I go too far to the right, it starts getting too yellow. Too far to the left, those blue tones start creeping in a little too much. So I'll keep it as kind of green in the leaves as possible, and then I will even it out with the tint. Again, to the right will be the magenta, and to the left will be green. So you want to get it, eyeball it as much as you can for the most natural look possible. So even right there, it's already looking a lot better. The exposure has been bumped up, and the color cast has been created for the most natural look possible. As far as the highlights go, I'll bump them up a little bit. That's going to, of course, all the lighter, the brighter parts in the picture. It's going to either make those pop, and you can see I have my clipping on, so I can see right there. If I go too far to the right, I'm clipping. I'm getting a little too overexposed here, and that means, of course, there's no detail in that little area. So that little area, not a big deal. But if you do go all the way to the other direction, it kind of mutes it down a little bit, but you can see a little bit more detail here in the leaves. So again, if you want to take a look here, oh, that was exposure. So the highlights, there you can go, you can start seeing that they're disappearing. So I usually bump it a little bit, get it just right. Shadows, of course, are going to the darker areas, the shadow where the light isn't hitting as well. You can of course clear that up by going to the right, and it will add a little bit more light to those shadows or lighten them up a little bit. Or if you go all the way to the left, you're going to darken it even more. But that also kind of affects the overall image as well. So you're not just getting the shadowy areas, it's kind of going to mute down the entire photo a little bit as well. So I'll keep that somewhere kind of in the middle there, and then move on to the whites. The whites is kind of similar to the highlights. If I push it all the way to the right here, you can see right away the clipping. It's all overexposed. None of that would be in detail. It'd just be basically a white glob, if you will. If you go all the way to the left, it starts getting, again, kind of muted. So, but you do want it to pop a little bit, so you do want those whites to shine a little bit. So we'll jump it up a little bit here. Blacks, so any of the black points in the image, if I move it to the left, you can see it's going to, really darken it. These blue spots here is clipping where there's no detail this time on the dark and the black sections of the image. So if I go all the way to the right, it completely takes away all of that, and you kind of miss a little bit because it's just too bright. So you do want a little bit of depth in the image, so you take that down just a little bit to get to keep a little bit of the blacks in there as well. Then I'll bump, I kind of just work my way down. I'll bump up the clarity a little bit, see if that makes much of a difference. I don't think I'll need too much on here. It'll just take a little bit, and I think it will. You can kind of tell it'll be too much too quick. As you can see right there, the clarity is making it look a little bit unnatural. If you go all the way to the left, it's going to blur it all out, and there's not really any clarity. So if I'll bump it a little bit, my vibrancy, there's a lot of green in the image, so if I bump that vibrancy, that green is really going to, become vibrant. And as you can see, if you go too far right, it doesn't take much again, and all of a sudden you can tell it's just way too much. To the left, you're going to cut down a lot of the color. It'll be just very muted, but you can still retain a little bit of the color in there. It's a little different than saturation in the fact that if you go, saturation is if you take out all the color, then you got a black and white image. Add too much saturation, again, it's kind of like vibrancy. It's just too much overdone. So we'll pull those down and keep them somewhere in the middle. All right, and then we'll keep moving on down here. It's already looking incredibly sharp, detailed, a lot better. We can also work a little bit with the sharpening and the noise reduction. Shot at ISO 100, it's going to be pretty detailed. I don't think I'll really need much sharpening. And the noise reduction, usually if you got a really grainy image, you might want to use the noise reduction to cut down some of the grain. So if you kind of go zoom in here, you can see if I sharpen a lot, we'll push it past here and like the red where it starts getting dangerous, you can see like all the little grain in the image. That can translate to the print as well. The idea is, of course, to have as much detail as possible without it becoming too noticeable. And then, for example, to kind of show you what the noise reduction does is now that I have all that grain in there, if I want to get rid of that and smooth it out a little bit, I can bump my noise reduction up, and it cuts out the grain a lot, but it's also going to smooth the image over. And if you kind of look right in here, you can tell it's not very natural. On an overall scale, it's not that noticeable, but again, if you're going to be printing this, all that's kind of going to show. So you got to be very careful with the sharpening and the noise reduction. So again, like I said, it probably doesn't need much sharpening. As you can see, I kind of took it down, and you can see right in here that it is a little softer already. And again, that's kind of working in conjunction with the 2.8 aperture, which is to get a very small portion of the image in focus, and then to kind of start blurring out everything. So if you're going to use a lot of noise reduction, like it's still popped here, that's really going to blur out that soft bokeh look. So I'm going to cut that actually back a ways so we can get a little bit more detail in all parts of the image. I might bump the sharpening up a little bit here. But I kind of like that where it is. You can tell there's not too much noise in there anywhere, and the image is still nice and sharp and crisp. I might even lower it just a tad bit. And I'm going to also move on to the vignette. Now this is kind of a personal preference, but in the way I shoot, it's kind of a little trademark of my artistic design here. So I always tend to bump the vignette a little bit. So as you can see, that's already going to darken the corners a little bit and draw your attention more to the focus of the flower itself. And of course there's different ways to adjust that as well. You can adjust the midpoints, the roundness. The feather you can kind of play around with a little bit. That's going to determine how noticeable the vignetting is. Where it's set right here in the middle, it's not too noticeable. You can see that it's a little darker in the corners, but it looks pretty natural. Now if I were to move the feather all the way to the left, obviously that is not something that is going to help that image. But it gives you an idea of soft and the soft feather versus the hard feather there, I guess. So if you move it all the way to the right, you don't see anything whatsoever. And it's a very minor adjustment. So, but I want to see a little darkness in there, so I'll do that. And right there, I'm pretty happy with the overall image. There's some other little tips and tricks that you can do as well. I do see this little thing here. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but it's kind of distracting, so I'm going to go to my spot removal tool here and get rid of that guy. And usually Lightroom does a pretty good job of matching up, so it looks like they did a pretty good job there. So you can always remove it to kind of see. It's not too noticeable. There is a little bit there, so I might move this around just a little bit, just so it lines up just right and it's not as noticeable as possible there. And then I'll of course kind of look around at other parts of the image. I did notice that there's little bits of pieces here. You know, they're natural parts of the flower, but again a little distracting, so I'll take those out. And I'm not going to get into the how much editing is too much editing in Lightroom. My idea and what I shoot for is just a nice, clean, crisp image, which we now have. It looks like there's a little webbing over here. I'm not even going to try to get that taken out of there. Maybe this little piece down here. But for the most part, that's a little much for the spot removal tool, and you'd be able to see a lot of the where I'll show you where I kind of removed it from and where added other parts too. So now it's going to take it from up there, it's going to overlay it here, and you can see it right there that it displaced some of the look there, and that's going to be way too noticeable that editing was done on it. So I'm actually going to just keep that the way it is. But that's pretty much the photo. So again, I appreciate you kind of stopping by here. Hopefully, again, this was just some quick little tutorial here on the different adjustment sliders and things like that in Lightroom that can easily change an image. Now, of course, there's a lot of different other things you can do. You can mess with the tonal curves. You can adjust individual colors. Just the highlights, things like that. There's also presets. I have quite a few presets here that I've accumulated over the time, over my days as a photographer. Be careful with the presets. They're a very nice jumping off tool, but I think a lot of times people rely too much on them, and they find a certain preset that they like, and they just kind of go with it and say, hey, now, oh great, there it is, I got a good image, it's done. But ultimately what you need is to know these different tools, how the histograms work, the adjustment brush, the cropping. This image didn't really need any cropping. I did pretty good right in the camera, and again, that's another important part of photography is knowing your camera, getting everything in front of the camera as possible so you have less work to do in post. But so here it is, our lady slipper, the very delicate, unique, and endangered Minnesota state flower that I was happy to catch after 12 years of shooting. I can't believe I hadn't actually achieved this shot yet. So here it is. If you like this little tutorial, if you want more stuff like this, or if you got specific tools or Lightroom questions, be sure to let me know. You can email me here, or you can subscribe to YouTube and let me know what you think. As a beginning YouTuber here, it's very important for me to kind of get my name out there. So I appreciate any if you like this stuff, you know, to like it, share it, and subscribe to the video. I will of course keep producing more videos, and I appreciate any feedback that you guys have for me. And until next time, thanks you for joining me here at Michael's Walk Photography. All right, thanks guys.